Welcome to the Can We Talk About It podcast.
I'm Jude,
And I'm Tori.
and this podcast is about us having open, honest dialogue about stuff that we've been dealing with in our lives, especially as two young girls in our 20s.
Some conversations will be heavier than others. Some may be funny, sad, or even triggering.
This is an open playground where we can talk about anything. Hence the title, Can We Talk About It?
So let's get talking. You are appreciated. Don't you know we love you, sweet lady? Place no one above you. You know that song?
No,
That's Tupac, Dear Mama.
I cannot relate.
So welcome back to episode 5 of Can We Talk About It? So before we begin this episode, I want to say something really quick. This is going to be a very deep, personal, raw, and honest conversation. This is about our parents, and this conversation is probably going to be a little triggering, so be prepared for possible tears.
I have no idea what's coming. I'm going into this episode blind. Tori has all the notes, and I have nothing.
Yes, this
So-
is something that I didn't want to have premeditated thoughts over, especially with you, because I feel like you're going to have more to say about this than anything. But this is going to be a very deep, honest conversation. So be prepared for
hashtag exposure.
exactly. So let us jump into this. First of all, how are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So
Well,
so this is, as I mentioned at the start of the episode, this is about parents. Not just anybody's parents, but our parents, obviously. And I want to know,
juicy.
what is your personal relationship with your parents?
What do you mean specifically? Like,
What is your relationship with your parents?
I mean, there's not much of one, if I'm being honest.
Okay, so explain that.
So, I mean, my mother, she lives in my hometown still, and she's married to my stepfather. So they're there, and I talk to my mom occasionally, maybe like once a month or so, sometimes less. Just kind of depends on her mood. But I'm not like particularly close with her. I feel like there's a time where I wasn't close with her at all, and then I was closer with her, and then she kind of fell back into old habits, and so I pulled away a little bit more. And then my father, like my biological father, I don't have a relationship with him at all.
Do you want to talk about those habits?
My mother is an alcoholic. Stop looking at me like that, Tori. They can't see you, but your face is like juicy. No, I mean, my mother's an alcoholic, and she's been an alcoholic since she was like 12 or 14. She had me when she was 16 years old, so she wasn't really around for my entire life, basically. And when she was around, she was not like the best person to be around. But yeah, she's had like 4 DWIs. She's in an Alcoholics Anonymous, one of those alcoholic programs. And despite that, she still continues to fall back into her habits, and I'm surprised that she isn't in jail right now, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, I mean, there was a time where she sounded like she really wanted to change, and I believed her, and so that's when we got closer. But then she started falling back into her old habits again, and I eventually realized like I can't do anything to change that, and it's not my responsibility to. So I still care about her, but there's a distance there that I have to maintain just for my own well-being.
And I don't know if you mentioned this already, but your mom had you when she was like a teenager.
Yes, when she was 16 years old. She had me, and then a year later she had my brother. So with that, like, my father was also like a year older than my mom at the time, so he was like 17 while she was 16. And they both just did drugs, and they partied, and that was pretty much it. He was abusive, and so they never got married, they never stayed together. Like, they were together for a few years, but then it broke off, and that's that.
So before we go back into your family, I want to talk a little bit about my parents.
Okay.
So my parents didn't have me when they were kids, obviously. My dad was like 30, going on 31, and my mom was 26. She was 36 when she gave birth to me. And by the time I was born, my brother was already around. So my parents were married, I think, couple years before they had me, and they were a very loving couple. They had only knew each other for like 2 months, and then they got married.
Mm-hmm.
My dad used to always tell me that he asked her to marry him over the phone. They were having a conversation, and he was like, let's do something crazy. And she's like, what? And he's like, let's just get married. And she's like, okay. And then they got married in Vegas.
That's so cute.
Mm-hmm. So they knew each other for a short amount of time, and they were together for, I think, like 12 or 13 years. And then they, circumstances pulled them apart, as in my mom died in 2005 is what I was about to say.
2005.
She died in 2005, and I had just turned 10, and school was about to start. So it was around, it was August 2nd, 2005, so we just recently celebrated the anniversary. That was also her birthday. So my relationship with my parents, well, with my mom, didn't really have a chance to blossom because she got cut off before I could have a relationship with her. Because she died when I was 10, but I don't remember anything before that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Because at this point, I've been alive longer than she's been out of my life. So most of my memories of her are kind of fleeting and vague. Don't remember what she sounds like. And if I didn't have photos, I probably wouldn't remember what she looks like. So my relationship, though, with my dad, which I'll get into a little bit later on in this episode, but my relationship with my dad has gone through, I think, every possible stage of relationship with a parent can, from just pure anger to misunderstanding to just no communication at all to having all the communication in the world to where we are now, which is a very, very, very good place. And I never thought that my dad and I would get to this place in our relationship, but it has taken some time. I mean, it's been 14 years since my mom died, and that's a lot of, I went from being a 10-year-old kid to a 24-year-old girl, or woman rather. So our relationship has taken a toll. And because of this, and this is something you can also,
oh, sorry, I'm dying.
This is something that you can jump into as well. But I want to talk about having to grow up before necessary, before you have to. And I know for me, my emotional state, I had to kind of grow up emotionally very quickly because of the fact that I was dealing with something that I didn't know what I was dealing with, if that makes any sense. I didn't know, because my mom had died when I was 10, I hadn't experienced anything that a girl goes through. I hadn't really developed any boobs. They were still kind of growing. I didn't have a period. All of that stuff didn't come until a year later.
Right.
So it's like, thanks. You could have waited a year so you can help me out how to figure this out, because I don't know how to handle a period. So this is something that I had to deal with on my own. I mean, my dad was there and I had aunts and cousins, but it's so different when your mom is not there to kind of assist you through it. So do you feel like you had to grow up faster than you needed to because of the non-relationship, so to speak, you have with your mom?
I mean, I feel like yes, but in a different way. So my grandmother actually raised me and my brother. My grandmother and my mom have not the best relationship with each other, and so I was always hearing conflicting things. So I hear one thing about my mother from my grandmother, and I hear one thing about my grandmother from my mother. So like they would always talk about each other, but like in a negative way, and they would like, and I didn't really know who to believe because I was a kid, and so I would just believe everything everyone said, and so I grew up not trusting anybody that I was with. And I had my younger brother, who was about a year and a half younger than me, that when we were younger, I felt responsible to take care of him. There were a lot of instances where my mom would be drinking, and so she didn't act the best, and so I felt like I had to be that buffer for him. And he and my mother do not have a good relationship even now. Like I don't think he's forgiven her. He keeps a lot of it bottled up, and he doesn't really talk to anybody. With that, like I tried for the longest time to kind of be like the older, responsible one. And so I think in that way, like I had to grow up because I had to take care of him in a sense, and I had to reassure him. But also at the same time, after we got to a certain age, I kind of started to realize that like I didn't even know who I was or like what I wanted, or I didn't understand myself like or my emotions at all. So I feel like I grew up in a responsibility manner. Like I kind of lost my ability to enjoy my childhood and like to do things that children do because I was always just trying to be responsible. Like I even started working when I was 14 years old because I was so bent on not turning out like my family. Yeah, I guess like I've just grown up with that sense of responsibility, and so I feel like even through high school, like I never made time for my friends. I never made time to do things that a lot of kids would do because I was just working full time while also going to school full time. Like I worked 2 jobs in high school. So I feel like I lost a lot of my childhood in that sense, and I had to grow up faster than I wanted to. I also just feel like I had to kind of learn to not rely on any adults. I had to learn to like rely on myself to take care of things because like I didn't have anybody there for me. And I had to learn a lot of like I got into reading after about 4th grade, and like I started reading a lot of nonfiction because I had to learn a lot about the world through that because my grandmother, she's very conservative and wouldn't really talk about those types of things like you were talking about. Like obviously like it was like an uncomfortable conversation just to talk about shaving my legs with her. Like, you know what I mean? And my mom wasn't around for those topics either. And my friends obviously weren't very reliable sources. So I learned a lot of what I learned through books. And I kind of taught myself a lot of the things that kids have to learn when it comes to like periods and sex and I don't know, the world in general. So I don't know if that answered your question, but.
I want to talk a little bit about, because one of the things that I have experiences a sort of loss of innocence. And because I think about my childhood and, you know, I had the most amazing childhood I think a person can have. And I don't remember, if you go and look through photo albums, you'll never see a photo of me or my brother or cousins not smiling. There's one photo of me where I'm crying and I'm sitting on my dad's lap and he's sitting like this, like pissed off, and I'm crying, and it's because he blew out my birthday candles when I wanted to do it. I think that was the context behind it. That's the only photo of myself crying. I mean, there's probably multiple times where I was crying, but it's all overshadowed by how much positivity I had growing up because my family was so open and honest about everything, and they were determined to make sure that my brother and my cousins and myself and whoever had love and support. Especially being a Black family, that was extremely important for us, is to have that sort of love and support because it's just, you know, it's important. But then everything got ripped to shreds after my mom died, and it became a thing of people shut down immediately. All of a sudden, the conversations that we were supposed to have no longer existed. Nobody wanted to talk about anything. No one ever wanted to be around each other. Where we would be around each other, but we wouldn't say anything. You know what I mean? And we would have our moments. I'm not saying after my mom died, my life turned to shit, but we had
garbage.
It wasn't like that. My dad gave my brother and I everything that he could, and I thank God for him every day. But the conversations became less, and the idea of innocentness went away because suddenly I was exposed to certain things that I guess had been shielding me before because I grew up in this, I wouldn't call it a bubble, but I grew up in this sort of state where everything was so pink and suddenly everything became very gray.
Right.
And so because you kind of, I just kind of want to go to your childhood a little bit. I don't know how deep you want to go, but this is, can we talk about it?
Yeah. So, like, are you asking me if, like, just about my innocence?
Just because eventually your innocence went away because at some point something happened where everything completely shifted, or it started out with everything being shifted, so your innocence was gone immediately.
So, I'm not gonna lie, I feel like my childhood was kind of the opposite, where I feel like I don't really have a lot of good memories about my childhood. Like, I'm sure there were some, but like it's all been so overshadowed by everything negative that happened. Every time I think about like being young and like being a child, like I can only remember all of these negative moments that have happened to me and feeling so trapped and feeling afraid. I have so many, like, I think growing up, like, I developed so many fears of people and of trusting people and just affection and connecting with people and intimacy, like all of those things. Like my grandmother, her love language is like materialistic, and that didn't translate to me as a child. So I just felt like when I needed her there, like emotionally or physically, and she wasn't, I kind of felt like abandoned. You know what I mean? Like I felt like she just didn't care, and that wasn't the case. She just didn't know how to show that she cared in the way that translated to me well. And I understand that now that I'm older, but at the time I just felt very alone. I felt very like abandoned. I felt like there was something wrong with me because nobody wanted me. That was something that like both me and my brother, I feel like, struggled with, because our dad, he was very in and out of our lives. He would like be there like for a couple of months and then he'd disappear for years and we wouldn't hear from him. And I remember like just wishing, like, you know, whenever you see a shooting star or something like that, you'd make a wish. I remember every time I had a chance to make a wish about anything, I wished that I could see my dad again. He would show up out of nowhere, but like for those years that he was gone, I just remember like me and my brother were always asking and crying, like, what did we do wrong to make him leave us? And my grandmother even remembers, like, she's told me that, like, she remembers us saying that to her and she didn't know what to do to comfort us. Whoops. And so, and I remember, like, my mom was very, like, aggressive and angry all the time whenever we were with her. And then my grandmother was just, like, not there with us as far as, like, being emotionally supportive goes. And so I felt very, like, alone, and I was also bullied as a kid, which doesn't help on top of my family situation. So I grew up in, like, this constant state of feeling like there was something wrong with me, and this constant state of fear of people and of being close with people and of trusting people. So I feel like my entire childhood just feels like a giant gray tinge to it. Like, I don't really have any happy memories of my childhood. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I'd have to think really hard about it to think of something, and even then it's not happy enough to make me feel any better about everything else that happened. My childhood, yeah, it also doesn't help because my grandmother has always shown a favoritism towards the boys in our family. So I feel like I was very neglected growing up, because even when my grandmother was there, it was more so for my brother and his emotional needs than mine.
What lesson do you think you've been taught from your parents?
What lesson do you think I've been taught? I feel like the lesson that I've been taught is to, even though, like, for example, even though my family has been a certain way towards me, I've grown past the resentment and I've learned to understand them. I've learned empathy, and I've learned to understand that even though they're not good for me and that they have toxic behavior, it's not because they're bad people. And they're also, I think they are the way they are because they have grown into the circumstances that they grew up with. And obviously we all have choices to make, but I think they're just products of their own circumstances that they were raised with. And so I think the lesson that I've learned from that is just to be more open-minded to people in general, and like people being the way they are, even if they're not like what I want them to be, or if they can't give me the things that I need, or if they're not like the best of people. I think I have a better understanding now that people are just the way they are because of their circumstances and the way that they've been raised as well.
So I want you to hold on to that thought, because I have a point that I want to make. But before I get to that, as far as lessons that I've been taught, I mean, there's basic lessons that you've been taught, or that I've been taught from my dad, right? There's basic stuff like how to tie your shoe, you know, the value of money, the value of friendship. That's all basic.
Right.
That's all basic. But I think certain lessons that I've learned, especially from, even my mom is not here, but I'm still learning from her every day, especially the older that I get. There's certain people that have come into my life that have told me who she was. And this whole idea of just keep going with your life, I think is what I've kind of, as a lesson that I think I've learned from my mom, is just keep going. Don't become a product of your environment.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other lessons as well, but I want to go back to what you said about, you know, this is just how my parents were. I think one of the things that I've recently discovered over the last, I'd say, year and a half, was I was only viewing my dad as my dad. I didn't view him as anything other than what he is to me, which is a parent. I never saw him as a man. I never saw him as a human being who has his own problems. He was always just my dad, who was supposed to cater to me only. Right. And once I got a little bit older and I started to experience different things in life, and especially now being able to have an open dialogue with certain people in my family, and it's gotten more and more open as I've gotten older, because it's like, okay, you're old enough to talk about this, you're old enough to handle this conversation. But now that I've experienced that, I suddenly see my dad completely different from how I did when I was 20 or
Right.
even when I was 16, because he's a human being first and he's his own person. And I didn't understand that for the longest time. Do you think that because your mom had you when she was a kid, do you think that that has done anything to her? I mean, obviously it has, but what do you think?
Kind of like how I said before, like I understand that like people are product of their circumstances, and what I mean by that is similar to what you're saying. Like they are people. Like I see my family members not just as like my mother and my dad and my grandmother. I see them now in a light of where they are people and they have a past that has turned them into who they are today. And so with my mother, she started drinking and smoking at the age of like 12 or 14, I believe. I've had a conversation with her before where she felt like very much so how my grandmother favored my brother, she also favored my uncle when my uncle and my mom were growing up. And so my grandmother was never really there for my mom emotionally either. And so I know my mom experienced a lot of the same, maybe feeling of abandonment growing up, but she didn't handle it in the same way that I did, where I grew up and I learned not to take it personally. My mom took it very personally, and I think that it was detrimental to her self-esteem and to her self-worth, and I think like she started drinking to cope with it. And my mom has a very, she likes to put on this like outer exterior of that she's tough and that she's independent, but I think deep down she's very codependent and she wants to rely on other people to take care of her, and that's just who she is. And I think like another lesson that I've learned over time also is that I can't fix people, and it's not my responsibility to fix people. And I've learned that from my family as well, is that I used to blame myself for their problems, and I used to want to fix them, and if they were a type of way towards me, I blamed myself. But I think growing up, like I've realized that that's not the case, and that's like another lesson. It's not exactly what we were talking about just now, but I think that's another lesson that I've learned now that I'm speaking about that. And then with my grandmother as well, like I understand her, like when she grew up, she was born in 1955, and it was a time where they still whipped you with like a switch, like, you know, like those branches. Like if she misbehaved, like she'd have to go out and pick a switch and her father would whip her with it. And so like she grew up in a very, very different time than we did. Like she was one of the first women to start wearing jeans to school. She's a very like self-reliant, independent, strong-headed woman, and I think that's part of the reason why she doesn't understand like certain emotional, like she doesn't know how to be there for someone emotionally and how to empathize with them, because she's very like she's gonna solve her own problems. Like she's never had to do that for people before, because she was like the only girl growing up with two other brothers, well actually three brothers, and one of her brothers died. And so she has just always been that kind of way. And so I think that's part of the reason why she, like, whereas like my mom and I, we're both similar in the fact that like we need reassurance and we need support and like all of that stuff. My grandmother wasn't able to provide that to us because she just doesn't understand that, and she's never had her mind open to the fact that that's something that we needed. And she didn't realize that she was doing something wrong by not giving that to us. She didn't realize like that we needed that to feel safe and to feel secure. And so I guess I see them more so as people than I see them as like just my mother or my grandmother. And honestly, I don't really know anything about my father. I don't really care to, because he's been horrible enough that I'm not going to make excuses for everyone who doesn't try to at least let me understand them or like to be there. And my father, since like I'm sure he has like his own things that he's been through, but he was also very abusive, and I still think that people make choices and we're not stuck on a certain path just because we've been raised a certain way or just because we've been through certain things. So there's a certain limit as well, if that makes sense.
I want to kind of talk a little bit about because even though your mom is alive, she's very absent.
Yeah.
And my mom is obviously not. But it's still very similar of having something that's not there when it should be. How do you feel like growing up, essentially, even though your mom's been there, she's kind of been a shadow more than anything? Would you agree? Yes or no?
Yeah, kind
Okay.
of.
So because she's a shadow, and do you think that growing up without, I know you had your grandmother to be like a mother figure, but to not have your mother, do you think that has affected you in any way? And you can be don't give the politically correct answer.
The politically correct answer?
Don't be like, well, yeah, because she's like it's taught me, like,
No,
just be really
I
honest
mean,
about it.
honestly, no. I don't feel any different because I'm so used to it. Like, I feel like I grew up thinking, like, I didn't realize it wasn't normal, my family situation. I didn't realize it wasn't normal until I was about in middle school. And then I started, like, I found, it was in, like, 4th grade. My brother made friends with this kid down the street, and his friend had a sister. And so I started hanging out with his sister, and we were in the same grade, same age. And when I started hanging out over there, like, their family was, like, mom and dad were still married, had 2 kids. Like, they were a little bit of helicopter parents, but, like, they were still, like, very, like, close-knit family. And so I didn't realize that, like, my family wasn't normal. And till I, like, started hanging out with that girl and her family, and then also the kids that I was going to school with. Like, we were raised in a very, like, Christian conservative area, and so it was not really normal for people to be raised by their grandparents. Or when people asked me about my family and the fact that, like, my dad wasn't around and that my mom was never married to him, like, that was a shocker to people. I didn't realize it wasn't normal until I was older. And so I feel like by the time I realized it wasn't normal, like, I don't know if I felt like, I didn't really feel like an absence per se. Like, I felt resentful because I felt confused, and I still, like I said before, I wondered, like, what I had done to deserve that, and, like, why my family was like that and nobody else's was. But I mean, if anything, I feel like the more absent, like, figure in my family was my father, because I, like you said, I did have my grandmother there, and she kind of served that mother figure role for me. And there were times people would always mistake my grandmother for my mother. They would always be like, "Oh, your mom." And I'm like, "Oh no, that's my grandmother." And so, like, I don't know, it just, like, she always kind of served that role, but, like, the one figure I didn't have in my life was a father. And so I guess if anyone felt absent in my life, it would be him. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
Do you, or I should say, what relationship would you like to have with your mom?
what relationship would I like to have? I mean, I can't really say, because the way that she is right now, I don't really want to have a relationship with her, because she's still on her bullshit, as you would say. She's still going back and forth with her addiction, and I feel like I know that she can be better, but the fact is she's choosing not to be, and I'm so done with trying to make a difference there and trying to change her. Like, even just last year, I stayed with my mother and my stepdad for a few months, and during that time frame, like, every time she went on a drinking binge, like, I would find myself having panic attacks and crying and blaming myself for not being able to stop her. And I was like, this is not my responsibility. This is not my fault to take care of her. And so at this point in time, I can't say that there is a type of relationship I want with my mother. If she stopped, like, if she was able to get past her addiction and past all of this crap that she's been doing for years and years and years, and she still has not changed, I was like, if somehow she was able to finally make a change that lasted, I mean, I don't know. I don't even know if then I would be wanting to have a different relationship with her. I'm content with us staying at a distance just because I don't need her anymore. I grew up without her, and I learned to not need her, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not going to sit here wishing for a relationship with her.
I don't know if it's about wishing. It's just thoughts.
But, like, even if I did have the chance to have a relationship with her, I don't know if I would want to, because I learned a long time ago, well, not even just a long time ago, but I've learned in general that not to want for relationships that don't give back to me in a way that, like, I need. Like, if I'm not getting anything out of a relationship, like, why am I in this relationship? If I'm just giving and giving and I'm not getting anything in return. And I feel like that's the relationship that I've had with my mother in the past, and I can't imagine having a different relationship with her. So with what we have now, just being at a distance, like, I'm okay with that, because I don't need her, and I don't really want that type of person in my life, if that makes sense. She has potential to be a good person, and I believe in her, but she's toxic for me. And
You're
so
not
I
gonna
don't
wait around for it.
Yeah, so I don't want someone who's toxic in my life, despite even if I care about them or even if I think they're good people. If they're toxic for me, I can't have them in my life.
I want to kind of share a personal story. It's not like sad or anything. It was just kind of like a harsh reality. I remember when I was in, I want to say it was like early to mid high school. My friend, her mom, who I thank God for every day because I don't think I would have made it, especially through middle school and early high school without her. But she had said one day she wanted to do like a mother-daughter trip because it was like a group of us that hang around each other from the time that we were like in early like 6th grade up until now. Really, some of us don't talk, but anyway, she was like, I want to do a mother-daughter trip, and it was probably going to be about it was 5 of us in the group, so all 5 mothers, right? And so she was like, oh, we're going to go here, and I was like, well, I guess I'll just see you guys when you get back. She's like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, I don't have a mom, so I can't go with you. And she's like, well, that's not true. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Unless you know where mom is at and I missed it.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, you could bring your aunt. And I was like, I love my aunt to the moon and back, but she's not mine. And it hit me very quickly that that's always going to happen to me when something comes up where people are like, oh, you can just bring your substitute parent. And I don't want a substitute parent.
Yeah.
I think, and that's one of the things that I had to, now I hope my dad gets married soon just because I want him to have a partner. But when I was 14 and he was dating, I was like, hell no, because that's a substitute. I don't want a substitute. I just want what's mine. Now it's not like that because my attitude is differently, but I remember when I was younger and she was like, oh, you can just bring your aunt. And that was the worst thing I've ever heard because, like I said, I love my aunt, but she doesn't belong to me the way that she belongs to my cousin. And I want what I want. And the fact that that was taken away from me, I was so upset about it. I was pissed off at other people because it subconsciously I was like, it's all your fault, even though my mom died on her own. Nobody killed her. You know what I'm saying? She didn't kill herself, but that sounded like she killed herself. But you know what I mean? Like she had a brain aneurysm, and so that's what happened. But when she said that to me, it just hit me very quickly that I'm going to constantly from, the day that we put her in the ground up until now, I'm going to always have that absent.
Yeah.
It's always going to be absent.
Yeah.
And it's going to be this weird hovering thing. And I remember when I graduated from high school, everybody was like, oh, we're so proud of you. We're so proud of you. And I had my aunts there and, my family, everybody came out to support me. But I just felt like it wasn't enough.
It also sounds to me like when they're saying, oh, it's okay if you can't bring your mom, you can just bring your aunt. It's almost as if they're saying like, oh, it's okay, your mom's dead, so you can bring your aunt instead. Like, it's like, I don't know if that's like how you took it, but like to me, if someone said that to me and like one of my family members had died, I would have been like, you're just dismissing the fact that like I just don't have a mom. Mm-hmm. And you're saying, oh, it's okay because you have this other person in your life. And I'm like, no, it's not okay. Like, I'm still not okay the fact that she's gone.
And one thing I also hate, and I feel like my family's going to listen to this and they're going to feel a kind of way, but I know where their heart is and I know where they're coming from. I just hate when people go, she's still here with you. Don't say that to me, because she's not. Spiritually, I know. When a gust of wind flows through, I'm like, oh, that's my mom's spirit. But she's not here. I can't hug a gust of wind. Mm-hmm. I can't talk to a flicker of the lights. You know what I'm saying? I can't talk to...
I mean, if you did, you'd probably be crazy.
Right. But I can't talk to a tombstone on the ground.
Yeah.
Because nothing is there but a shell. And my best friend, her mom died a couple years ago as well. And her and I were talking about it. And she was like, my mom used to always tell us when we were younger, if and when I die, don't go to my gravesite because that's not where I am.
Yeah.
And so when people are like, oh, your mom is still with us, she's still here with you, and I'm like, no, sure, she's in my heart, but I can't talk to that, and I don't want to talk to that, and that's just something that I'm gonna have to deal with forever.
Right. Don't cry. We're gonna take a moment so we can both cry for a little bit.
So anyway, I want to go on to talking about the effects that our parents have, the effects of what our parents, wow, get my thoughts together.
She's still crying, guys. Just temporary technical break.
I want to talk about the lasting effects that your parents have on you rather. And I know for me, I have this thing about like becoming a parent and a mother, for example, that kind of scares me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know what it's like to have...
Do you just need to cry for a minute?
No, because if I start crying, I'm never going to stop. So yeah, I want to go into the sort of lasting effects they have on us, our parents. And I'll start, unless you have an immediate thought you want to throw out there.
No, you go ahead.
So I think for me, I know that I'm not, like, it doesn't, and let me just state this, it doesn't bother me that, I guess, for example, I've moved on from the sort of grieving period, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And so that's not really an effect. That's not really a lasting effect. It's always going to be kind of like a thorn in my side, but I'm not choked up about it. You know what I mean? Especially since we just recently got done celebrating the 14 years, and it was also her birthday. It didn't bother me. Like, I wasn't trapped in a corner crying, and I respectfully moved on.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't forget. I just moved on. But I want to kind of talk about the lasting effects that our parents have on us, good or bad, it doesn't matter. And I know for me, I have a particular standard about certain things now, kind of going into my dad since he's the one that's around. But I have a particular standard when it comes to men, number one, because obviously I was raised by a man.
Right.
But I have a particular standard on how I view men in relationships. But I also have a particular standard on how I want a father to be. And there's certain things that I can maybe talk about a little bit later, but what do you think is sort of a lasting effect that your parents have on you?
I mean, I feel like they've definitely at least had an impact on just who I am as a person. Like, I'm very, like I said, I definitely have trust issues. And that, like, applies to not only, like, my friendships, but also, like, my relationships. I still do, and I have had very, very hard time letting myself be close to people or be intimate with people. I'm very blunt and straightforward, and I'm open about a lot of things that people aren't open about, but there are specific things that, like, I feel like I also use that as a way to kind of deflect the things that I don't want to talk about, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'll be open about certain things that people aren't very open about, but there are certain things that I will intentionally not talk about, and I think people don't realize that I'm not really opening up about those things because I am so open about other things, and so I can be very close aspects. So there's that it kind of made me have these unrealistic expectations of relationships, like with my friends and with men, and just like romance and just in life in general. I feel like I kind of like I said before, like, I learned a lot of what I learned through books, and so I had like this like fantasy version of what relationships were supposed to be. Like, I would see like this really close-knit friend group in a book or like in a TV show that I watched, and I would expect all my friends to treat me that way and act that way, and we would all be that close-knit, and it would be like this perfect little like squad of people. But like, that's not very realistic, especially as we get older, when your friends start to kind of like grow out and you're all doing different things with your lives. Like, you're not going to be like some squad goals or stuff, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then when it comes to romance, like, I was always expecting someone to save me and to take care of me and to fix all my problems, like my emotional problems for me, and to like kind of dig into me and figure out why I am the way I am and to care about me and all these other things. But like, I never let anybody get close enough to me to let them discover that, like, to discover me, if that makes sense. So like, I was expecting, like, I would tell someone like I'm fine, but then I was expecting them to like realize that I'm not fine, you know what I mean? Like, it was always like, I've always been that kind of way. So like, I feel like I could be very passive in a manner, and then I would feel resentful towards people for not realizing that I'm not okay even when I'm like saying I'm okay, if that makes sense. So I guess those are some like big ways that like growing up the way that I did has affected me. Majorly just like intimacy issues, trust issues, and then just like being very closed off and resentful. For years I was very resentful. I'm not as resentful as I was, but for the longest time I was very resentful.
My next question that I have is, are you angry at your mom and dad?
Am I angry? No, I'm not. I used to be, but I'm not anymore. Like I said, I used to be very resentful. I'm not resentful anymore. Especially about things that have happened in the past. Now, there are certain things that if they continue to happen that affect me, like for example, if my mom were to be drinking right now and I were to have to deal with that, I wouldn't be angry per se, but I would just shut it down. I'd be like, no, I'm not dealing with this. I would walk away from her. And I would make her deal with her own shit on her own. You know what I mean? Like I'm not gonna behave in the way that I used to. I think I used to be angry because I took on that responsibility. Obviously, like I'm not pleased if she were to go on a drinking binge now. I wouldn't be pleased about it, but I'm not gonna be angry with her because that's her addiction. That's her life that she's messing up, not mine. And so with my father, I was very resentful for years, and I didn't know he was abusive actually for the longest time, like towards my mother. Like there were certain things that were red flags when I was growing up, but I was just a kid, so I didn't really read them well. But I didn't realize like how bad he was. And then there was a point in time where he cussed me out and called me all these things, and I was like, a father would never talk to his daughter that way. And so I was like, you're not my father. Like I was like, I don't need you. I was like, you haven't been here forever. And so at the time, yeah, I was angry, but I feel like I've just let all of that go because it's in the past and I can't do anything to change it, and like I just don't care anymore. Like they've basically lost their relationship with me, and that's more their loss than it is mine. And so I wouldn't say I'm angry, no.
It seems like there's a little bit of annoyance there, at least.
I mean, I don't really feel like annoyed or spiteful or anything like that. Like I genuinely just don't care. Like I feel apathetic, if anything, if that makes sense. Like I used to. I'm not saying that I wasn't angry at one point in time. Like I'm not saying I wasn't resentful. Like I was, and I was very angry for a very, very long time. And I used to have the worst temper, and I'm like not a patient person even now, but like I used to have like a very bad temper, and a lot of it was just because I was very angry with them. I think at this point in my life, I'm not, like honestly, like I'm just not anymore. Like if anything, the thought of it just makes me feel tired. I'm like the thought of like getting worked up or getting angry or anything like that, I'm just like, I don't have the energy for that. You know what I mean? Like I have so many other things that I would rather be focusing on. Like rather be focusing on my relationships with people in my life now. I'd rather be focusing on the person that I want to become and the person that I am now. And I don't know, all that's just like in the past to me, if that makes sense.
Do you forgive them?
I don't know.
Can you?
I mean, I feel like if they genuinely wanted my forgiveness, or if they could see that how they were wrong in a certain way, then I could like at least attempt to forgive them. But the matter of fact is, I don't think even to this day that they realize how their actions have affected me or how they've wronged me, like growing up. I don't think that they realize those things. And so I don't, like, they don't even have the capacity to ask me for forgiveness, so how can I have the capacity to forgive them?
I mean, but there's a way to look at the parents and see the things that they've done to you and go, you know what? Everything that you've done to me is horrible. It's nothing that I asked for, something that I even thought about wanting. But I forgive the situation and I'm moving on from you. Does that make sense?
I guess. I mean, I don't feel like I'm the type of person to like hold a grudge, if that makes sense. Like I remember things, but like I don't act spiteful. I don't act on things that I remember, if that makes sense. So like even with like, for example, if like I've had a friend and they did something really shitty to me once, like yeah, I'm gonna remember that because I feel like that's a lesson for how I'm gonna continue with this relationship forwards if they want to continue having a relationship with me. Like for example, if someone stands me up, like they plan a time and then they just like ghost me or something, and then they turn around like months later and they want to have a relationship with me again, I'm gonna remember. I'm not gonna hold a grudge about it, and I'm not gonna be petty, and I'm not gonna act out on it. I'm gonna be like, that's cool, like it happened, like I don't know what they were dealing with or what they were going through, so like I'm not gonna hold on to that, but I am gonna remember because that is a foundation for me to be cautious about how I approach my relationship with them going forwards. And I feel like I don't really know, I guess, what it means to forgive them, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know what that's supposed to feel like or if I've done that or not, because, like, I don't feel resentful. I don't feel like I have a grudge, but I am cautious.
There's animosity there.
Yeah, I guess. Wait, what is animosity?
It just means, like, strong hostility.
I wouldn't say hostility. I think there's a caution. Like, I feel very cautious.
Okay.
Like, I'm very protective of myself when it comes to that relationship now. Like, I don't trust them. They've lost my trust is what it is. And I don't have confidence in them as people. It's not that I am resentful of them or that I don't forgive them per se, but I don't trust them anymore. And I don't think I'm ever going to trust them, because once you've lost my trust, it's very difficult to regain that. Because to an extent, I think, yes, people are capable of changing, but I don't necessarily believe that people will change. I think they can. I don't know that they will. And I think it takes a lot. And like for example, with my mother, there was that period of time I told you that I got really close with her again. And during that time, the reason why I felt closer to her was because we started having conversations about my relationship with her in the past, and like all this other stuff about my brother and my grandmother, and like how I felt like my mom was just never around and all this other stuff. And she was like, oh no, that's only stuff that your grandmother's told you. And I'm like, that's not true. It's like, I lived through it, and I remember you not being there. And when you were there, you weren't yourself because you were so influenced by the alcohol. I was like, and I remember you treating me this type of way. I was like, I remember all these circumstances, and I like told her every circumstance that I remembered. I was like, and I told her, I was like, I understand that you were dealing with all this stuff yourself, and like, I get that you have an addiction and all this stuff. And I was like, I told her at this point in time, she had stopped drinking and she was doing really well, actually. And so I was like, I told her that I respected her because she had showed that she had the capacity to realize her mistakes and then make changes and move on from the past. But in the past year or two, she's obviously shown, what's the word, like to go backwards. Do you know a word for that? Like, she started resorting back to
old habits
and old behaviors, and she doesn't even like take accountability for them. And so that makes me think now, I'm like, how much of before was an act and how much of that can I trust? Because she's shown me time and time again that this is the side of her that's real, to me. This is a side of her that always never fails to show up in the end. And so I'm like, it's not that I don't think that she perhaps at that time really did want to be better and want to change, but I don't trust that that's going to last, if that makes sense. And so I don't think I can totally forgive her because I don't trust that she's going to, she still hasn't moved on. She still hasn't changed from her past. If she had changed, maybe. I don't think it matters if I forgive her or not, though, because like I don't want a relationship with her.
Well, I don't think you forgiving her is gonna result in a relationship suddenly. It's not like you go to her and go, I forgive you. It's not about that. It's about, I forgive everything that you've done to me, but now I can move on with a clear state of mind, if that makes any sense.
I guess I just don't really see that there's anything to forgive. Like, I don't know. I honestly can't answer that 100% just because I feel like I've accepted it and I feel like I've moved on from it, and but like I don't know if that's something like that, if that's what forgiveness means. It's just like I don't trust her even to this day to be different, and so I don't know if I can say that I've forgiven her.
Okay.
So I don't know if I can fully say one way or the other, or like answer the question the way you're wanting me to, just because
I just want you to be honest.
I'm being honest.
So there's no right or wrong answer. It's just honesty, and that's as best. If you aren't there yet, you're not there yet.
I mean, that's as best as an answer as I can give. Like, I don't feel like I'm holding on to it, but I also don't feel like I've totally forgiven her, just because like I think if I had forgiven her, I would perhaps trust more in the fact that we could have a relationship in the future, if that makes sense. I don't know. I honestly, I can't say for sure, just because I don't know what forgiveness feels like.
Okay.
I don't know what that means. Like, I don't.
And that answers the question. And there's no right or wrong. It was just a simple, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So if you could tell, because you don't really care much about your dad. So there's no real.
Nah, he's just kind of an asshole, and I'm like, meh, whatever.
So if you could tell your mom one thing, what would it be? If there's one thing that you want her to know, what would you tell her?
I feel like I know that she has the capacity to be a better person, but I wish she would just open her eyes to the reality of who she is and the things that she does and the way she treats the people around her. Not just me, but everybody else in her life. Because she has a tendency to play the victim of her own situation. I'm like, you got yourself where you are today. I was like, you're entirely capable of moving past this, and I believe that she could be such a good person and she could really go places, but she's so stuck in the cycle of being a victim, she won't be accountable for her own actions. And I'm like, I think that's what's keeping her where she is that she's not accountable for herself. So if I could say anything to her, that's what it would be. But I feel like she wouldn't take that very well. So
is that it?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Do you love your mother?
Do I love my mother? I hope she never listens to this podcast. I want to say no. If I'm being 100% honest, I want to say no. Like, every time she says that to me, I feel like it's a weight on my tongue to say it back to her. That's really messed up. You're looking at me a type of way, and I'm like, I feel so messed up for saying that.
I mean, you shouldn't feel bad for the way that you feel.
Yeah. I feel whenever she says that she loves me, like whenever we're on the phone, and she's like, oh, I love you, and if I have to say it back, it feels like a weight on my tongue. It feels like a burden, and I hate that more than anything. That's one thing. If I'm resentful about anything, like, that's probably the little thing that's left over, is like every time I have to say that to her. Sometimes I don't say it at all. Sometimes I'm just like, okay, bye. Like, I avoid saying it because I don't really, I feel like it's a formality that I have to say just to make her feel good, but I don't really feel anything there, if that makes sense.
I want to ask you something, but I'm not going to go there.
Go ahead.
No, because it's too much.
Go ask.
Because it's kind of bad.
Just ask. We can cut it out if we have to.
This is going to sound horrible, and I don't know why my brain went there, and I shouldn't say anything because now I feel like I have to say it.
Yeah, you have to.
This is horrible.
Just say it.
We're going to cut this out.
Can we talk about it? Apparently not.
Your mother died tomorrow, how would that make you feel? I know that's kind of a weird question to ask because it's not happening, but...
I know. I've actually thought about this with both my mother and my grandmother. And I have to say, I honestly have no idea how I would feel. Like, I've thought about it. I'm like, would I feel bad or would I feel regret? And I'm like, or would I just feel like apathy? I'm like, I don't know how I would process it because I've actually never had someone close to me die. Like, I've had pets, but that's it. I've never, like, dealt with, like, a person dying. So I don't know how I would deal with that. And, like, to be fair, like I said, like, they're not close to me, and, like, I do feel that type of way. I don't know how I'd feel, honestly. Like, I don't know how I'd process it. So
I want to kind of answer my own question about what I would... So I'm going to sort of do it with both my parents. So if I could tell my mom one thing, I don't know. I don't know if I would tell her anything because I don't know her.
Mm.
What can I say to someone that I don't know? I can say I miss you and I love you, but that's all pretty redundant because that's obvious. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But as far as my dad is concerned, because I know him, I still am getting to know my dad. I think, or at least I would want him to know that he's a good dad. But I would also just say thank you.
What's your dad's name?
Kevin.
Hey there, Kevin.
I would just say thank you.
Yeah.
And I know that thank you is such a lame thing to say, but my thank you has so much weight behind it.
Yeah.
And I want to cry again because I'm a bitch, but, just, because I'll start crying.
Dude, I seem like this ice queen over here comparatively to you. You're like, thanks, Dad.
Because
I love my mom. I'm like, oh my God. I'm over here like,
Because I don't have any, I'm not saying that you do, so don't take this way, but I don't have any anger. I don't have any animosity. I don't have any friction in my heart when it comes to my parents. But they haven't wronged me the way that your parents have. So there's that.
Yeah.
My parents have just been, or my parent was just taken away. So I don't have any, I was angry before, especially since I was lashing out at everybody when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
But now I don't have any, I don't have any conflict in my heart. The only conflict that I have is just with myself because I'm still growing up.
Yeah.
But as far as my dad and my mom are concerned, I have no anger toward them. I did 14 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. But I don't have any, to go back to answer my question, I've forgiven my dad. There's probably nothing to forgive, but I've forgiven him because my dad was dealing with alcohol problems when we were younger. It was horrible. But I've forgiven him for that because I know where his head was at. I know that he was dealing with something that I won't ever deal with until my spouse dies.
And how is he now?
My dad is great now. He still drinks, but he's not drunk. That makes any sense.
And see,
I mean, I'm still drinking, but the thing is,
there's the difference as well. Is that my mom hasn't changed very much. Your father seems to, he dealt with his shit, but he's dealt with it. It's in the past.
My dad has grown up a lot.
Yeah,
and I see him. We used to have this recurring argument about my mom, and he would be like, "That was my wife," and I'm like, "Who gives a shit? That was my mother." And now that I'm older, I look back on that and I'm like, that's utter trash that I would even think that, because the love that you have for someone is so important and it's so real because that's the person that you chose to be in your life. That was the mother of his kids. And so I don't have any, like I said, I don't have any friction in my heart when it comes to the cards that I was dealt.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't do anything for me except hinder my growth, and I don't want that in my life. And so for me, when it comes to having these emotions, and that's why I cry. I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because it's growth, and it's just something that I've had to deal with. And if I'm gonna be older having to deal with this, and especially if I become a mother at some point and a wife at some point, I'm gonna have to have these honest conversations with myself and with people in my life. But I would just tell my dad thank you. And as again I said earlier, thank you is probably so lame, but it means so much to me, and I hope that he understands that. I'm gonna cry again, but I just hope that he understands that.
Yeah, Kevin.
I don't know.
You better be listening.
No, he's.
She never shuts up about you.
No, I don't, because my dad's ridiculous, and he's so ridiculous. Like, he's like the most ridiculous person I've ever met, but he's perfect.
I just imagine him on a pedestal with this like halo around him.
I mean, don't get me wrong, my dad has his flaws, but he's a good dude.
He's a good dude. Don't cry again, Tori.
No, I don't know.
Intermission for crying again.
No, it's fine. I just.
Oh, sorry. I'm just mocking you crying. I'm so sorry.
I don't know. He's been through a lot in his life, not just from losing a wife, mother of his kids, but just growing up as well. I mean, his parents are still alive, but he's just been through a lot, and he's a strong guy. He's a strong man, and I appreciate that. And I thank God every day that he chose him to be my dad.
Yeah, that's so good.
So yeah. So I just tell him thank you. So,
All right, well,
where's the quote?
I have. Can I say the quote this time?
I guess.
Yes. Okay.
So this is. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing.
Thank you
your
for
woes.
sharing.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for crying in front of the entire nation. The
I
entire
don't care,
world.
bro. I'll cry.
Every
Shit.
single person on this planet is listening in to
I don't
hear
care.
you cry.
I don't care. I'm not afraid to show my emotions. I'm not afraid to cry. I'm not afraid to get vulnerable. I'm an open book when it comes to a lot of stuff. I may not have the right answer. I may not always know exactly how to get there, but yeah, you get it. Anyway,
Okay, well, we're going
let's
to
give
wrap
us a
up
quote.
this podcast with a quote. I actually chose this different quote. But yeah, so the quote of this week is, "You are always free to change your mind and choose a different future or a different past." Richard Bach.